Welcome to Convergence. My name is Michael Doran. I'm a California attorney. I just had a conversation with one of my followers, and he said, why are you calling the show Convergence? You should talk about it as more about climate change and the Earth's magnetic field and how there's electrical complexity in climate, how CO2 isn't interesting as a greenhouse gas. It's interesting in clouds in the context of electrical fields. You should give it another title. And I was thinking about that. It's a good comment, but just as I'm thinking about it, another incredibly divergent source of information comes out and just affirms what this is about in terms of how technology is advancing in all these different areas, and ideas are coming together, and they're converging, and they're really shining light on this topic. Albert Einstein said, among the most difficult problems in all of physics is the Earth's magnetic field. My name is Michael Doran, and I'm arguing as a California attorney that among the most difficult problems in all of biology is Earth's magnetic field. And this idea of a living Earth, and fundamental to a living Earth is Earth's magnetic field. Because if you go far enough back in time, then you come to a place where if there's too much of a magnetic field, you'll get a planet like Jupiter. If there's not enough, the solar conditions will rip away the atmosphere, and you're left with no atmosphere. Earth's magnetic field is incredibly important to life. And so the question is, even though we're talking about really large scales and really tiny scales, is whether life, so small as it is, has developed an intelligence that allowed it to protect the Earth as a whole from space weather and control the Earth's magnetic field. So just a new story just came out. I'm reading from Watchers News, dated May 23rd, and it's talking about the European Space Agency and their satellite mission, and they call it a swarm satellite mission, meaning that there's more than one satellite and they're all kind of all together. And the scientists were looking at the data from the swarm, and Watchers News came up with this. They interviewed the lead author of a paper talking about a 7-year cycle of the Earth's magnetic field that was occurring. And the lead author, Nicholas Gillett, from the University of Grenoble Alpes, University of Grenoble Alpes, probably French, sounds like. Geophysics have long theorized over the existence of such waves, but they were thought to take place over much longer timescales than our research has shown. And I want to point out that one paper that I talked about in one of my prior podcasts was the Keeling-Whorf paper on the moon cycles of 1800-year climate cycle with a moon pattern. And that was out of, that paper is out of Scripps. What they saw was that there was an orbital pattern to the moon, and it matched neatly with an 1800-year climate pattern. And when I was in high school, I remember my physics teacher talking about the orbit of the moon was what heated up the interior of the Earth. And he rubbed his hands and he said, it's friction. And that's the reason why we believe, or scientists believe, that the moon was much closer than it is now, and that there were 50-foot tides at that time. And then over big time scales, really, the moon has increased its distance, and you can't, the idea you can't create or destroy energy, it comes out in different forms, that this heat energy was from the fact that the orbit, which was more energetic close to the Earth, is now further away, and that energy has been lost to heat. So tying that into what Nicholas Gillette is saying is that I believe that part of these other cycles that we've seen, or that he's suggesting, is this 1800-year cycle, where the magnetic field affects climate, and it's expressed in climate. That's how we know about it. He goes on to say measurements of the magnetic field from instruments based on the surface of the Earth suggested that there was some kind of waves action, but we needed global coverage offered by measurements from space to reveal what was actually going on. Again, this is convergence. This is a new technology being applied, and it's showing things to us that then are applicable in other areas of science. We combined satellite measurements from SWARM, which is the satellites, the multiple satellites, and also from earlier German CHAMP mission and Danish Ørsted mission with computer model of geodynamo to explain what the ground-based data had thrown up, and this led to our discovery. Owing to the Earth's rotation, these waves align in columns along the axis of rotation. The motion and the magnetic field changes associated with these waves are the strongest near the equatorial region of the core, which is, by the way, where the strongest lightning occurs. So lightning occurs over land mostly, and then in the tropics mostly, where the thunderclouds are highest and the most direct light from the sun occurs, and where the oceans are warmed up the most. Magnetic waves are likely, he goes on, likely to be triggered by disturbances deep within the Earth's fluid core, possibly related to buoyancy plumes. The buoyancy plume is, you warm something up, right? It expands, and then relative to, in this case, the lava around it, it becomes lighter, and so it rises. Each wave is specified by its period and typical length scale, and the period depends on the characteristics of the forces at play. For magnetocoriolis waves, the period is indicative of the intensity of the magnetic field within the core. So, I guess I could read the rest of it and then talk, but our research suggests that other waves are likely to exist, probably with longer periods, but their discovery relies on more research. This current research certainly is going to improve the scientific model of the magnetic field within the Earth's outer core. It also gives us new insight into the electrical conductivity of the lowermost part of the mantle and also of the Earth's thermal history, said Ilias Daras, European Space Agency's SWARM mission scientist. Okay, so let's talk about what Coriolis is. If you were a bird and you were flying from the equator north, at the equator, the Earth is spinning at 1,000 miles an hour. As you go north, the bird experiences a different spin because the concentric circles get smaller and smaller until they're a point when you're at the north geographical pole. So that bird experiences a different speed relative to its speed, and that causes its flight to curve. And the same phenomenon occurs at a varying degree as you go underneath the Earth's surface, to the subterranean. And so what is being suggested here is that if the Earth is heating up inside, there's thermal plume, there's a heated element, and it's moving, then the speed of the spin will be different, because as you go up, the circumference of the Earth expands, or as you go north, like that bird, also the relative spin changes. So there's very complicated motions going on, but fundamentally, there's a couple things that are missing here. One, it's what's the source of the heat? If it's the moon, then that source of the heat certainly is going to affect where, if you have the motion of the moon causing friction and causing heat, as the orbit of the moon changes over time, that's going to change where heating occurs. And then, therefore, the motions involved affect the geodynamics of the Earth's magnetic field. Now, this is a random, there may be a pattern that is picked up again by the Keeling-Whorf paper, but it's not a living, dampened kind of thing. It's also in no way related to lightning, and lightning, like if you have a toaster and you have a current and you push the toaster down, and the wires go to a filament or an element, and it turns bright red with heat. That's where electrical currents are being turned into heat. So you have this connection between what's electrical, what is heat, and what's the electromagnetic field of the Earth. And the problem is, if this is just a random chaotic occurrence, you're going to get, without any dampening, you're going to get extremes such that it's going to result in extremes in electromagnetic field of the Earth, and then you're going to have the same problem that you had with the early part of the Earth, where it's not a dampened system, and you can get extreme. You can get either a lack of a magnetic field where the atmosphere gets stripped away, or you can get too much magnetic field where it traps gases and water from space, and then you get a greenhouse gas effect. You get Saturn, and you get basically a lifeless planet. Those two extreme conditions lead to pressure on life over time, that life responded back with feedbacks to modulate or dampen the Earth's magnetic field. And what's particularly interesting about this 7-year cycle is that we know now that the sun has a 21 or so year, a 21 year or so cycle, where based on the sunspots, you go through the 10 or 11, 10 and a half year sunspot cycle, right? But then it flips its magnetic orientation, and the new sunspot cycle is also 10 years, but it has an opposite magnetic field condition. And because space weather from the Milky Way or cosmic rays is kind of at an angle, it matters what the orientation is relative to the Earth and to space weather and cosmic rays, what the orientation is of the solar cycle. So it is a legitimate 21 or so year cycle, because you have to consider both of the sunspot cycles, with one orientation, the other with the other orientation, to get a true full cycle of what's going on relative to what's happening to Earth with these inputs that affect cloud behaviors and then the feedbacks that are occurred. And it's my view that 7 years, it fits precisely into this 21-year cycle, because it's three cycles to or three of these swarm cycles that they're talking about that go with a full cycle of the solar cycles. And why that matters is it's an indication that the system is dampened, because this is a cycle that aligns with what's going on with the sun. There's no reason for this cycle to have a mathematically tuned type of presentation, and yet there it is. So how is this practical? Well, let me give you an example. I'm watching the tropical storm season in the Atlantic, and the beginning of the season, the prediction was that we were going to have an active season. It was because there was a La Nina, and active seasons are associated with La Ninas. Yet here we are with numerous dams around the world, and then this 7-year cycle, and where we are in terms of what the 7-year cycle is, and where we are with respect to the solar cycle. It's a different set of conditions that affect whether a tropical storm will have this favorable electrical complexity set up for tropical storms in the Atlantic to appear. And it's highly relevant then for tropical storm forecasts. And I would say the National Weather Services are doing the public a huge disfavor by not looking at this electrical complexity and what it means for cloud microphysics, what it means for carbon dioxide that gets supercooled in where clouds gets supercooled to ice, and the rate at which that occurs in the context of these electrical fields. Just incredible implications. Implications, for instance, horrible drought in China after they've built massive dams along the Himalayas. There's dams by India, Pakistan, and Afghanistan. That whole region, when you start talking about if electrical conditions like a toaster heat up the subterranean, and then that affects conductivity, that affects patterns, electrical patterns, and feedbacks, and all these different things are being altered by human activity that is now becoming large enough that it's bigger than the biosphere, it's bigger than the feedbacks, and we're starting to pay the piper for this. And if we don't get on it, we're going to have starvation around the world. And this is highly relevant to our existence as human beings. And I'm going to stick with convergence, because this is just yet another example of science advancing, and we're figuring out what the Earth's magnetic field is. Different areas of science are coming together, and they're really showing that CO2 is interesting in clouds in the context of electrical fields, low frequency, not HARP, but not high frequency energy in electrical waves, but low frequency, low resonance, Schumann resonances are becoming very clear around the world. It's tied into the Earth's magnetic field. It's what the magnetic field is in large part created from. It's not just the double domino and the movement of the metal cores, it's also the input of electrical currents from global lightning patterns, and how that also alters the Earth's magnetic field. And then it's dampened. It's dampened by life itself. And it's been dampened for a very long time, huge time scales. So this 7-year cycle is not just the result of the movements of the dynamo, or it's kind of like a generator, electric generator. We have the movement of metals in the earth. It's not just that, it's also lightning and electric currents, and that lightning and those electric currents are a product of the earth as a whole and feedbacks. It's dampened. So the 7 years is yet another implausible complexity, where it matches up in such a way that it's mathematically related to something that it shouldn't be, that has nothing to do with it, which is the sun's cycle of 21 years. All right, so I wish you good luck, and thank you for watching. If you like this video, please hit the like button, and I'll come back with another video as interesting stories like this come up. And thank you for watching Convergence.